Hello and welcome to Dialogue. For months, U.S. President Donald Trump has been embroiled in the battle with Harvard University over allegations of anti-Semitism. Research funding has been cut, foreign students have been banned, and Trump has threatened to redirect a further $3 billion in future grants to trade schools. Is this a fight for student safety or a political assault on elite institutions? Can the U.S. government dictate who private universities admit? And will the U.S. continue to be the destination for international scholars? Join us for discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Fangzhou Jiang, MPA candidate of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and co-founder of Crimson Education, and two Harvard University alumni, Tiffany MacLennan, higher education researcher, and Anton Fedyashin, associate professor from American University. Welcome to the show. So, Tiffany, I will start with you. We know that since last year, with the students, especially from Colombia, for example, protesting and blaming Israel for the violence in Gaza, we know that the U.S. government was not happy, including people from the Congress, And then all of a sudden, we see the escalation of the tension between the government and Harvard. So, what is the fundamental reason, the root causes of this problem here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me today. I think it's safe to say at this point, this probably goes well beyond anti-Semitism. Last year, of course, sparked a lot of complex and incredibly painful conversations and disputes across the country, not just in higher education institutions, but elsewhere as well. Many of the institutions, including Harvard, were accused of not doing enough to protect Jewish students. Many of these same institutions ultimately ended up trying to address these accusations through traditional pathways, like bringing together institutional task forces, committees, to address things like academic freedom and protecting Jewish voices on their campuses. One could argue that the Trump government didn't see that as quite enough action or not fast enough action. If you've ever worked in universities, these things move slow. But the scale and scope of actions that have been taken by the Trump government since then suggests something that is a lot bigger. Every blunt policy tool that is used affects all students, researchers, and academics, and that includes Jewish students, researchers, and academics. So to say that all of these actions, such as holding government funding, banning international students, is in the name of anti-Semitism, seems a little bit unfair. What this is more so is, I think, really an exercise in how much the Trump government can kind of shape what conversations are happening within American campuses as opposed to just outside.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anton, of course, the Trump government recently, I mentioned basically several factors, anti-Semitism, talked about foreign students, or relationship with other governments, and talked about previously, wokeism, diversity, DEI, etc. What do you see as the major concern, the major consideration for their, withholding of this grant fund and other, pressure policy there?
It looks like the Trump administration is trying to kill two birds with one stone. On the one hand, it is appeasing its American Israeli donors, Miriam Adelson being one of the most important ones, in trying to really sort of crack down on anti-Semitism. On the other hand, Donald Trump has never hid the fact that he does not like liberal policies, everything that you just mentioned. And the Trump administration has gone after universities and has targeted funding which really has nothing to do with the question of Israeli policies or even the Middle East in general. So I think that what the Trump administration is doing is using anti-Semitism, the crackdown against anti-Semitism, as an excuse to target freedom of speech on university campuses. The question of the foreign students, of course, is something completely separate, because that doesn't even have to do with the Israel-Palestine or Israel-Hamas issue and conflict. That's a completely separate issue. But now we've gone into the sort of the area where the Trump administration is simply trying to bully universities into doing what it expects them to do. And in this sense, by the way, the Trump administration reminds me most of the Richard Nixon administration, which never actually used the tools within its disposal, but in the sense of distrust for the East Coast liberal university establishment, Trump resembles most Richard Nixon.
Fangzhou, you are students, you are from China. I wonder, you have spent most of the time inside the Harvard campus. Do you probably have Jewish friends, Jewish, colleagues or students there? Is there a sense that there's anti-Semitism that probably make Jewish students feel insecure?
There's some, I would say, concern around the protest that's been going on campus for more than a year. Especially in early stage, a lot of students felt a little bit unsafe. I was the vice president at the Kennedy School Student Government, and we've received, a good number of requests to be protected, sometimes for the students, or occasionally students have family members such as young children, and they want to feel a bit safer with the protection of from the school. So there's some voice there, but at the same time, I as a student largely feel pretty okay to express our opinion, whether it's me or other international students from China or from Israel. So I guess there's some truth to it, but the school does one job to give students as much of a space as possible to express their opinions.
Fangzhou, you are part of this group, that represents 27% of the students' body at Harvard University, and now, of course, the government is basically revoking Harvard's certification and the student and exchange visitor program, basically banning Harvard from enrolling international students. What's your response?
Absolutely. That was came at a huge shock when we found out about it last Thursday. At first, we thought it was fake news because we never anticipated the administration would go this far. But after that, we realized that was real and just completely left in shock. Many of us were immediately wondering whether we were still able to stay in the country legally, or do we have to depart immediately? For next year, do we have to take a gap year or take our classes online? And implication goes beyond just the current international students. For incoming admits, they are wondering whether they can still start or they have to transfer to a different institution. And for those who have already graduated but still on Harvard OPT, they're wondering whether they can continue to work. So definitely a lot of uncertainty around the student body. Late last week, of course, the temporary restraining order helped calm some students down, but still this big question about what we should do over the summer and next academic year and beyond remains, and that creates some problem for the wider population.
Tiffany, of course, Trump spoke on record during on his campaign trail before he came to the White House office. He talked about he complained about the universities of higher institution here of making our students into communists and terrorists. Obviously, he's sometimes when he talked about this, quote unquote terrorists on the campus, he referred to sometimes foreign students. And of course, if you follow the government order, basically, the foreign students either transferred to other institutions or you face the loss of your legal status. Is that workable, tenable for international students to transfer to another, higher institution in the U.S.?
That depends. I think a part of what we're seeing with kind of the juxtaposition of saying, international students on these campuses are terrorists, and then things like, oh, well, then you can just transfer to another institution, is really saying that this is an attack on Harvard as opposed to an attack on international students more generally. In terms of transferring to other institutions, that is going to depend on other institutions' openness to taking more international students. There are processes in place, of course, to transfer. It's quite a common process, but having a mass transfer from one of the most elite institutions in the country, likely to other incredibly elite institutions, will pose a challenge, but that is something that will have to be looked at a lot more seriously depending on how this court order plays out.
Well, Tiffany, he's asking for the details of the students, which country they are from and other personal information. My understanding is like the government has all the information, because if you apply for US visa, you basically fill out the form with all your personal information, right? Yeah, Harvard, there are all kinds of information for the students, but also the government has the information, right? Why they're asking Harvard all the information of the students?
I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking, because yes, when we apply as international students, we have to go through the visa process. They have everything pretty much about us, from where we live in our home country, where we will be living there, how much money's in our bank accounts as we're applying. Like, these are information that the government does have access through and is sitting within the Department of Homeland Security. Why they're asking Harvard for that, I think, is really just a play to gain control over what information Harvard has, and to kind of create those connections and boundaries and push them a little bit further to say, we can ask you for these things and you have to comply with what we're saying. And if not, there will be repercussions. You're absolutely correct. The Trump government does have access to this information in some way, shape, or form. So this is really a political tool.
Well, Anton, of course, Trump also, said, basically, he said, like, his idea is like, we need more welders rather than philosophers, right? So it's sort of like, elite institutions is some useless, it's not that useful, let's say, in terms of his vision of what kind of a country, or to make America great again, that idea. Well, the targeting the foreign students, do you think he's serious in basically, shrinking the body of foreign students? Or is he simply, this is a tactic to pressure Harvard, to align with the government in terms of ideology, in terms of policies? What's his purpose here?
This looks like a pressure tactic, because financially this makes absolutely no sense, either for the universities or for the American economy. International students bring in an enormous amount of money, both to universities where they study, not just private ones, but also public ones, but also to the American economy more broadly. Foreign students are a source of very badly needed cash for American institutions of higher learning, because they are not eligible for federal money the way that American citizens are. And so they get either different scholarships or they pay for their own way. And that's an enormous influx of cash into the United States from abroad, which is exactly, of course, what Donald Trump says that he wants to continue to do. He's constantly complaining about the amount of money that leaves the United States because Americans consume so much more than they actually produce. So as with most of the Trump administration's policies, you've got one hand working against the other, and that's assuming that one hand actually knows what the other is doing. But ultimately, this means that, to me, that this is a pressure tactic. This is a way to dominate the university system in the U.S., and that's why Donald Trump is going after the wealthiest and the most established, and by the way, the oldest university in the United States, which is Harvard, which was founded in 1636. So by making an example of the most powerful private institution of learning, he hopes that he will exert pressure on the others and not even have to bother with them.
But Anton, do you think that it is legal? Is there enough legal ground for the government to ask for the details of the international students? Do you think the Trump administration needs approval of the Congress to pressure the higher institution like Harvard to submit all the information of the students?
Oh, I don't think that they actually expect Harvard to submit any information. I think Tiffany was right in saying that that this is a pressure tactic. This is pushing the envelope. This is sort of moving the legal line of responsibility and liability that Harvard thinks it has closer to its its own territory, shrinking. That line. The US government has all of that information, as you also noted. Everyone who applies for a visa voluntarily submits this. Incidentally, every consulate makes it clear that the US government has the right to refuse a visa without any explanation whatsoever. Right. So the legal issue here is not really an issue. The United States government can revoke visas. The issue here is power. It is domination. And it is control over the free speech on university campuses, which, by the way, has always been one of the things, along with the enormous amount of money in the American education, that has attracted an enormous amount of talent, some of the best brains on the planet to come to the United States. And Trump is going to undermine this source of great strength that the U.S. has enjoyed for decades now.
Well, speak of that, Fangzhou, we know that you are also the co-founder of Crimson Education, basically which helps students stand out in the competition for prestigious schools. So, I mean, you must know, the students exchange program. You are familiar with that. How do you look at this program in the U.S. and how important are they in terms of promoting people-to-people exchanges between nations?
Absolutely. At Crimson, we work with students with over 60 nationalities across 20 plus geographies to get to their dream institutions in the United States and other countries like the UK, Canada, etc. Being able to study internationally is definitely a very, very beneficial experience for a lot of students who want to develop their language capabilities, and more importantly, for those who are looking for cutting edge research or exciting career trajectories with very fast growth. We've observed that in recent years, the demand for top American universities is really, really on the rise, not only from China but also from India, the Middle East, and many other countries. Myself included. I mean, Harvard has been, an aspiration for many, many years, and a lot of students work incredibly hard to achieve that. So when they see this huge policy uncertainty, I think that's definitely could be a bit of concern or even discouragement. I mean, over the last several days at Crimson, we've received a lot of, queries from our existing student population and also some prospective families as well. They wonder whether this is going to stay with Harvard. Will this be resolved quickly, or this is going to expand to other university campuses as well? And we've received a growing number of queries about the university application processes for Canada, for Singapore, for Australia, etc. So definitely this is on top of mind for many international families. But overall, Harvard as an institution, as Anton pointed, has been around for 500 or so years, right? And it's survived many administrations, a lot of policy changes, even wars. And we're very, very confident that Harvard and other institutions will be able to go through this challenge. And of course, my word for students around the world is still stay very hopeful and don't give up on your dreams of pursuing the highest level of education.
Yeah, some degree of assurance, I think, for a lot of people. I know a friend of mine, his son is in Harvard, and the grandma here in Beijing is deeply worried about her son, whether that's safe enough, whether he should return to China or not. Anyway, during his speech or tweets, Donald Trump mentioned, directly or indirectly, China or the cooperation between certain Chinese, I guess, department with Harvard, like Kennedy in the school. Is that a concern for Chinese students?
It hasn't been a big concern, I guess, for a few reasons. Number one is that, as Chinese students, on campus, we're treated very equally, I would say, by, other students, from the US and other countries and faculty as well. We weren't, accused of being, doing anything extraordinary in this regard. And as a student there, looking at the sheer number of foreign leaders, diplomats that have close ties with the Kennedy School, I think that's one thing that makes the Kennedy School or Harvard University very special, right? The reason why I chose to come to Harvard in the first place is that I would be able to interact with practitioners and leaders and academics from the US and all over the world, right? That involved people like Deval Patrick, a two-term governor of Massachusetts. I learned a lot from him in terms of running, political campaigns. There's also the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, who was a research fellow at Harvard as well. So personally, I feel that having some kind of communication or interaction with foreign dignitaries and political leaders is not necessarily a bad thing. In the U.S. Or for top U.S. universities, and having private fundings from foreign or international organizations is also very healthy, concept in terms of supporting the university's research mission and other educational missions too. So I feel these elements, at a reasonable level, are definitely to be expected, and we haven't seen anything far beyond that.
Yeah, good to hear that. And Tiffany, we mentioned a little bit about, of course, the true purpose of Donald Trump in, his dealing with Harvard. Some say Trump's moves are aimed at reshaping American higher education, but weakening the autonomy of the traditional academic institutions in order to make them more, as I mentioned, in line with political and ideological goals of the Republican conservatives. Specific, probably people would say the higher education institutes often are described as the camp of the liberals there. Right or wrong. Do you think he will be able to do that? How can he say make Harvard like a camp base for Republican conservatives?
Absolutely. I think there is a lot of research that does show that universities, especially elite universities like Harvard, do produce graduates who are slightly more progressive leaning, particularly in areas like race and immigration, which also makes them a pretty significant target overall to a conservative government. But the concourse of, we'll take funding from Harvard and then move it to trade schools, which are traditionally a little bit more conservative in their values, is one tool that may have some impact, but likely won't change, I think, the atmosphere overall. I think regardless, the institutions are going to continue to have their academic freedom and be able to kind of move through this. As it was said earlier, these institutions have survived many other governments, wars, a lot of narrative like this before. So I think really this is just kind of one piece that ultimately will cause probably some ripples in the right now, but I think have limited long-term effect.
Mm-hmm. Anton, are you also confident that Harvard will weather over this crisis, and in what way? And currently there's a court order, of course, halting the ban temporarily for the enrollment of international students. Then what will happen then after that?
I think Harvard's going to continue bringing in international students, as will other American universities, because they have the legal tools to keep those channels open. I think it would take way too much political capital for the Trump administration to actually fully carry out what it envisions in its feverish heads as sort of a conservatization of American universities. But it won't be for lack of trying. This is where the American commitment to free speech, including, by the way, protests against what Israel is doing in Palestine, this will be the test of just how committed the United States is to free speech and an academic environment which is open to the exploration of all ideas, no matter how unpleasant they may be to some people. Those are the founding principles of the American Constitution. And in a sense, Donald Trump's administration is launching the U.S. on a very important soul-searching and political theory testing period, which I'm afraid may last for the next 3 years, of seeing how committed the American population is to the principles which it holds so dear and for which it has sacrificed so much in its history to defend.
Well, Anton, you are a political scientist. I know, beyond education, we are seeing that Donald Trump government is basically having a war domestically and also, obviously, externally with many countries, like tariff war and other issues. What do you make of his policy, both domestic and international?
Well, the overall mindset has been clearly defined by Steve Bannon, by the way, during the first Trump administration as economic nationalism. And it is a form of American exemplary exceptionalism. In other words, the belief that the United States is the best country in the world, but stripped of the missionary commitment to then export democracy to the rest of the world at the cost of multiple wars and state collapses that the United States has unfortunately caused a lot of over the past 30 years. The problem with this idea of economic nationalism and with conservative nationalism in general is that it is completely incompatible with the status of the United States as a leader in global education, because once you start cutting yourself off from the global brain talent, that's going to bring the quality of your academics down. And number two, it's completely incompatible with the American dollar remaining the international reserve currency. And the more committed the Trump administration is to this form of economic nationalism, the more it will catalyze the decline of American hegemony, which is already apparent to everyone on this planet, but may only speed up in the next 3 years, depending on what policies the Trump administration will decide to implement.
Tiffany, of course, I mean, most people, all of you basically believe Harvard will weather over the problem, the crisis with the Trump government. But then, how do you look at the impact? Anyway, it's causing a stir uncertainty around the world. People are looking at the U.S. Higher institutions, whether that's the destination for their kids or for themselves, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that will come out of this, while I do remain optimistic, there will be a little bit of talent flow, especially if the U.S. continues to send the mixed signals that they are on how welcoming they are as a global education destination. There are places like China, Canada, Germany, who are all science and innovation hubs that people could easily go to. But at the end of the day, the U.S. is still one of the massive research funding pools of the world. They are one of the they're the holder of some of the most prestigious institutions in the world. And ultimately, they have a very good track record of turning research into really useful innovations. There are other countries who could benefit from this right now, and they really should be taking a serious look at it. But a lot of these places around the world, let's look at Canada for an example, have a lot of issues in their higher education systems too. There's not a lot of money to go around to bring in extra talent. There's not a lot of infrastructure to bring in extra talent. Okay. And the visa challenges are just about the same.
Right.
So I think overall, there's a possibility for people to be thinking about bringing in some new talent, and that will be at the expense of America.
Tiffany. Well, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.